If you have ever fought harder when you were already losing, you played yourself. Most people believe persistence is strength. They believe resistance is noble. They believe surrender is weakness. But power does not reward emotion. It rewards calculation. And sometimes the most intelligent move in a losing position is not to fight harder, but to step back, concede ground, and wait for the structure to shift. This is Law 22 from the 48 Laws of Power. Use the surrender tactic, transform weakness into power. Most people misunderstand this law because they misunderstand surrender. They think surrender means giving up. It doesn't. It means choosing not to waste resources on a battle you cannot win. There is a difference between losing and being destroyed. The amateur fights every battle. The strategist chooses which battles matter. When you are outmatched in leverage, in timing, in resources, in public perception, resistance often strengthens your opponent. You exhaust yourself, you expose your desperation, you escalate their aggression. But surrender does something unexpected. It removes friction. And when friction disappears, the aggressor often overextends. This is not philosophy, it is structure. In conflict, only a few variables truly matter: resources, positioning, incentives, and time. If you lack advantage in the present moment, your only real asset is the future. Surrender preserves the future. Ego interferes here. Most people resist surrender because their identity is attached to the fight. They equate retreat with humiliation. They think conceding means accepting inferiority. But ego is expensive, and in competitive environments, expensive emotions get punished. Strategic surrender is not emotional. It is mathematical. When you are in a losing round of a repeated game, the optimal move is often to minimize losses and reposition for the next round. Continuing to escalate only compounds damage. The mistake most people make is treating every interaction as final. It rarely is. Careers are repeated games. Relationships are repeated games. Negotiations are repeated games. When you recognize that the game continues, surrender becomes a tool, not a defeat. History illustrates this better than theory ever could. In 1812, Napoleon invaded Russia with what was considered the most powerful army in Europe. The expectation was direct confrontation, a decisive battle, and a dramatic victory. But the Russian strategy was not resistance in the traditional sense. They retreated, they abandoned territory, they burned resources. They refused to give Napoleon the decisive engagement he wanted. Every step deeper into Russia stretched French supply lines thinner. Winter approached. Morale deteriorated. Logistics collapsed. The Russian army did not win through superior battlefield dominance. They won through strategic surrender of ground. They preserved their core forces. They conserved their strength. They allowed geography, climate, and logistics to do the work. Napoleon's army was not defeated in a glorious clash. It was destroyed by overextension. That is Law 22. Surrender territory. Preserve power. Let time shift the equation. Now translate that into modern life. Imagine you are in a professional environment where someone attempts to undermine you publicly. You could fight back immediately, you could expose them, you could escalate, but if you lack authority in that room, escalation benefits them. It gives them attention, it creates drama, it frames you as reactive. Instead, you step back, you remain calm, you allow the moment to pass. Privately, you build alliances, you strengthen performance metrics, you document patterns, you reposition structurally. Months later, when the same individual overreaches again, they lack credibility. You don't need to fight. The environment now supports you. You surrendered the moment. You won the arc. This applies equally in negotiation. When the other party believes they have leverage, pushing aggressively rarely improves your position. It signals urgency. It signals dependence. Instead, you withdraw interest. You reduce pressure. You allow silence to stretch. You surrender immediacy. Often the side that appears strongest begins to doubt. When you surrender urgency, you regain leverage, because urgency is weakness. Law 22 is about recognizing when resistance increases loss. There are moments when fighting back strengthens your opponent's narrative. If someone attacks you publicly and you respond emotionally, you validate the attack, you amplify it, you turn a spark into fire. But if you absorb the hit without visible reaction, the aggressor loses momentum. They expected resistance. They expected drama. Without it, they often escalate too far, revealing insecurity. Silence can be surrender, but silence can also be strategy. The distinction is intent. Unintentional surrender comes from fear. Strategic surrender comes from analysis. One is collapse, the other is conservation. To apply this law properly, ask three structural questions in moments of conflict. Is this battle winnable right now? Not morally. Structurally. What happens if I escalate? Does it improve my leverage or deepen my disadvantage? Is this a repeated game? Will there be another round? If the game continues, preserving position matters more than winning the present exchange. Now we need to address something critical. When should you not surrender? You should never surrender when the loss is irreversible. If stepping back permanently damages reputation beyond repair, surrender is not strategic. You should not surrender when doing so signals permanent weakness rather than temporary repositioning. And you should never surrender without a recovery plan. Strategic surrender must always include repositioning. Otherwise, it becomes submission. There are moments when resistance is necessary precisely because surrender would establish a precedent. If someone tests boundaries early in a professional or personal relationship and you consistently concede, you define yourself as lower status. In those moments, controlled resistance is required. The key difference is this: are you surrendering to conserve power, or surrendering because you fear conflict? If fear drives the decision, it is not Law 22, it is avoidance. Strategic surrender is calm, deliberate, and temporary. Another mistake is surrendering too late. If you wait until you are emotionally overwhelmed, you are not conserving resources. You are reacting to damage. The skill lies in recognizing inflection points early, when the cost of continuing exceeds the benefit of pride. This requires emotional discipline, because your instinct will tell you to fight, especially when challenged publicly, especially when insulted, especially when underestimated. But the strongest individuals are not those who react instantly. They are those who choose timing. The most dangerous opponent is not the loud one. It is the one who absorbs pressure quietly and recalibrates. In personal relationships, this principle becomes even more nuanced. Arguments escalate when both parties seek immediate validation. If one person chooses to step back, not to concede truth, but to de-escalate structure, conflict loses fuel. Later, in calm conditions, influence returns. Again, surrender preserves future leverage. The deeper theme beneath Law 22 is conservation. Conserve reputation. Conserve resources. Conserve emotional energy. When you are weak in position, time is your ally. And time only works for you if you survive the present. There is an ancient strategic principle: when outmatched, avoid direct confrontation. Change terrain. Law 22 is the social expression of that idea. If someone has superior authority, do not challenge them publicly. Shift the battlefield to competence and results. If someone has superior numbers, avoid head-on conflict. Isolate variables. If someone has superior status, build parallel influence quietly. Power is not constant assertion, it is selective engagement. The irony is this: people who never surrender often appear strong until they collapse under accumulated resistance. People who understand when to surrender appear flexible until they dominate through patience. The difference is foresight. Strategic surrender requires tolerance of temporary discomfort. It requires the ability to appear passive while actively recalibrating. That is maturity in power dynamics. It is also rare. Most people would rather feel powerful now than become powerful later. But power does not reward impulse. It rewards patience. Law 22 forces you to detach from the ego response and assess structure. Am I fighting because it is wise, or because I refuse to feel small? When you master surrender as a tactic, you become difficult to manipulate. Opponents cannot bait you into disadvantageous battles. They cannot exhaust you through provocation. They cannot pull you into fights that benefit them. You choose engagement, and choice is power. The final insight of this law is subtle but important. When you surrender strategically, you reveal who overestimates themselves. Some opponents interpret your retreat as weakness. They grow careless. They overextend. They assume victory prematurely. And in that overconfidence lies opportunity. You cannot observe that if you are locked in constant combat. Sometimes the most aggressive move is patience. Sometimes the strongest display of dominance is restraint. Law 22 is not about giving up, it is about surviving intelligently. It is about recognizing that the game continues beyond the current conflict. If you can endure a temporary loss without emotional collapse, you preserve the only asset that truly matters in power dynamics: future positioning. Not every battle deserves your energy. Not every insult deserves your response. Not every attack deserves retaliation. Sometimes the winning move is to step aside, let the force pass, allow the overextension, and strike when the structure shifts in your favor. Because surrender used correctly is not defeat, it is delayed victory.